Good evening, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well this evening, and I hope your family is blessed. I hope you are enjoying the great fall weather that we're having right now, that God has blessed us with. And I also hope that you are enjoying this study of the book of Genesis. Just a powerful book, the book of beginnings, the very first book of the Bible that lays down foundational truths and practices for us to follow the rest of our lives. And hopefully, you're finding these messages applicable. I just want to encourage everybody. The way that it will really bless your life more is if when you are reading along in your Bible and you are studying and making personal application every day by having a devotional time. And if you're not in the habit of doing that, that is absolutely indispensable for your spiritual growth and for the growth of your children. If you have children in your house, hopefully this pandemic, one of the good things that can come out of it is that we're together more and hopefully we're establishing some new habits. And one of the habits that I would encourage all parents to make sure that they have with their children is the habit of making sure that you have family devotionals together. And these Sunday night lessons on the book of Genesis can be a means of you guys doing that. And just talk with your kids about faith and about spiritual issues and pray with them, and that will be a wonderful foundation for their faith in the future. And I hope and I pray that you all are doing that. We mentioned this morning, I talked about the great passage from Genesis chapter 33, the reconciliation, the reunion between Jacob and Esau. Both of them obviously had been being worked on by God. God had softened the heart of Jacob. He had changed him. He wasn't completely changed, as none of us all are. We still have this battle between these two natures that we have. But Jacob was in the process of changing for the better. And not only that, but his brother Esau was in the process of changing as well. You remember that Esau, 20 years earlier, when Jacob had deceived him and tricked him out of the family birthright and the blessing, he had vowed to kill Jacob. But instead of killing him, when they saw him again, he ran to him, he hugged him, he embraced him. They both cried and wept, and both of them apologized to one another, and they forgave each other. Just what a wonderful example for all of us. But what I want to talk about today is something I didn't talk about this morning, but this is also a powerful point from this passage. You see this map that is displayed right here. God had told Jacob to come down from the north, and God had told him, I want you to go back to the promised land, and there I'm going to bless you, and I'm going to watch over you. But while he was on the way to the promised land, he met his brother Esau, who was coming up from the south. Esau was living in this area called Seir, Seir, the name of a town, which was not in the promised land. It was east of the Jordan River, down in the land of Edom. And so they come up and they meet near the Jabbok River, as is pictured on the map right here. And they have this wonderful reunion, and that's all fine and good. The problem is that Jacob tarries right here. He tarries and he stays in this area called Succoth. Succoth means shelters. This is where Jacob built some shelters, and he stays there for a while. Now, that doesn't seem like that big of a deal. But God had told him, I want you to go to the promised land. And Succoth is not in the promised land. You can see from this map, it is still east of the Jordan River. The promised land is all west of the Jordan River. So he's tarrying, he's waiting, he's not immediately doing what God asked him to do. And as we're going to see, this is going to cause some issues. And then when Jacob does finally go into the promised land, as this map shows, notice where he goes. He goes to Shechem. And this is going to turn out to be a big, big problem, because God had told him, I want you to go to Bethel, and I'll show that map here in a little bit. But instead of going there, he goes to Shechem. Now, I know this doesn't seem like all that big of a deal. Okay, so he stays for a little while in, east of the promised land. And then when he does go into the promised land, he goes to Shechem and he doesn't go to Bethel. What's the big deal? Well, we all need to pay close attention, because obedience to God, and specifically to what God has asked us to do, actually turns out to be a big deal. It's going to turn out, as we're going to see, as this message, this story unfolds in the book of Genesis, we're going to see how it turns out to be a really big deal for Jacob and his family. And we also need to make this personal application. Brothers and sisters, when God has asked us to do something, He wants us to do it immediately, and He wants us to obey Him exactly as He has asked us to do. And when we don't do that, it's going to bring painful consequences into our life. And that's why God asks us to obey Him, because God knows things that we don't know. That is why God said, I want you to go to the promised land, and I want you to go to this town of Bethel. I don't want you to go to Shechem. But instead, Jacob disobeyed. He had partial obedience, you might say. Look at this passage in Genesis 33. It says, so that day Esau started on his way back to Seir. This is after Jacob and Esau had been reconciled. They had forgiven one another. Great example. And Esau starts on his way back to Seir, which is way down in the south in Edom. Jacob, however, says went to Succoth, where he built a place for himself, and he made shelters for his livestock there. He stays here in Succoth for a little while and made some shelters, a temporary settlement there, as we had talked about before. And then it says, after Jacob came from Padan Aram, which is way back up in the north where he came down from. This is where he had met his two wives, you remember. His wife Rachel, that he really wanted, and then his wife Leah, that the father-in-law Laban had deceived him into also marrying. He comes with his two wives and all their children. He arrived safely at the city of Shechem in Canaan, and he camped within sight of the city. And there at the city of Shechem, he set up an altar, and he called it El Elohe Israel, which is one of the names for God, depicting one of God's character traits. And once again, why is this a big deal? I mean, he's doing good. He's setting up an altar. That's true, he is. The problem is he's not doing it exactly as God asked him. You see this map right here, which depicts Bethel. There are other passages in the book of Genesis that we don't have time to go into tonight, but God had told him specifically, I want you to go back to the promised land. And specifically, I want you to go back to this town of Bethel. And it's at Bethel that I want you to set up an altar, and I want you to worship me from there. But instead of doing that, Jacob sets up this altar at another town, this town of Shechem, as you see from this map, which is somewhat north of Bethel. And you might be asking, well, I don't see what the big deal with all this is. I don't see anything in chapter 33 that says this is a big deal. If you continue reading on into chapter 34, you're going to see why this really matters. The result of Jacob tarrying at Succoth, the result of him tarrying there at Succoth, and the result of him building an altar at Shechem rather than Bethel as God commanded, what resulted from that? Here's what eventually happened. When they settled at this town of Shechem, Jacob had a daughter. Her name was Dinah, and Dinah was raped by the ruler of that son's area. And so the point is, if Jacob would have done what God said, if he would have immediately gone, and if he would have gone to Bethel rather than Shechem, his daughter Dinah never would have been raped. The truth of the matter is, Jacob didn't care all that much for Dinah. And the reason Jacob didn't care all that much for his daughter is because Dinah was the daughter of the less loved wife that Jacob had, and that was Leah. You see from this chart right here, you see that Jacob had children through two wives and two handmaids or handmaid servants. And through the wife Leah, which was the most unloved wife of the two, Jacob showed favoritism, which is wrong, and it always causes problems. Anytime we disobey God and don't do what he says, it causes problems. Well, one of the children of Leah was Dinah. And part of the reason, as you see in chapter 33 and in chapter 34, after she is raped and violated by the ruler of this area's son, Jacob doesn't seem to show all that much concern for his daughter Dinah, what has happened to her, as sinful as it was. And the reason is because he just didn't care that much for Leah, and he didn't care that much for her daughter Dinah as well. What this also does is, as a result of Dinah being raped, You see from this chart right here, you see who the brothers, the brothers of Leah are. She has two brothers who are named Simeon and Levi. What Simeon and Levi do is when they hear that their sister Dinah has been raped, they're going to get revenge. And so they go to this town of Shechem, and they tell all the men of Shechem, because the ruler of Shechem wanted Dinah to marry his son. And so they go and they say, well, we really can't do that unless all you guys are circumcised. And if you all get circumcised and you become Israelites like we are, then we will allow our daughter, Jacob says, and we'll allow our sister, the brothers say, we'll then allow her to marry you. This was all a ruse. It was all a plot. They had no intention of their daughter and their sister Dinah marrying this man who had raped her. What they were trying to do is they were using this holy practice of God, which was to set apart the Israelites in their covenant relationship with God. They were using this as a means of getting revenge on these men, because this practice of circumcision is quite painful. And it takes a while for men to get over that. And while the men, they agreed to this, they said, sure, we'll all get circumcised so that our daughter Dinah can marry our the son of that area's the ruler of that area's son. We'll agree to circumcision. But while they had gone through this surgery, and when they were recovering from it, at the time when it was most painful for them, on the fourth day when they were recovering, what Simeon and Levi did, they went into the city of Shechem and they killed every male there. Now, if that seems like over-the-top revenge, it is. This is over-the-top revenge. It is evil. It's sinful. True, what had been done to their daughter Dinah and their sister Dinah was wrong, but it shouldn't have resulted in them having such hateful animosity that they go and they kill every man who is in the town. But that is exactly what they do. And as a result of that causes tremendous problems, as you can imagine, in the relationships between Jacob and the people in that area for the rest of his life. This ought to be a lesson for us as well. Brothers and sisters, when we don't do what God's asked us to do, it's going to cause tremendous problems in our life. Sometimes the things that God asks us to do, the minute details, might not seem like all that big of a deal. But if God asks us to do something, we need to do it immediately, and we need to do it completely, and we need to do it not partially, but we need to do it as He has asked. And so the point, I think, from all of us is that partial obedience is actually disobedience, as we see in this text. Jacob does obey God, but only partially. He tarries to do what God says, and then when he, quote, thinks he's doing what God says, he goes and he sets up an altar, but he sets it up in the wrong place. And God had said, I want it to be set up in Bethel. Why did God say that? Well, God knew things that Jacob had no way of knowing, and that was, he knew what would ultimately result if he set up the altar in Shechem rather than Bethel. He knew the mindset of the people in this area. He knew this ruler's son who would eventually do what he did. And that's why God said, I want it to be set up in Bethel. And when he didn't do it, it caused incredible pain to their daughter and to his whole family for the rest of the time that they lived there. Brothers and sisters, God is looking for us to obey Him fully, not partially. Partial obedience is actually disobedience. And so I hope all of us will take this to heart. Take a good long look at yourself right now. Hopefully everybody will. Are you obeying God fully? Are you doing what God has asked you to do completely, or have you only been partially obeying God? Brothers and sisters, the reason God has asked us to obey Him is not because He's trying to be authoritative or the big boss or anything like that. It's because God's trying to protect us. He knows what is coming down the line in many cases, and He's trying to protect us. He's trying to guard us. God wants our life here in this world right now, not only in eternity, but now. He wants it to go well. He wants it to go well for me. He wants it to go well for you. And when we obey God fully, God's going to pour out His blessings on our life. And when we don't, It's going to bring incredible hardship and misery in our life that we just can't foresee. Hopefully, this will inspire all of us to trust God more and to obey what He says. He always knows what is best, and He wants what is best for you and for your family. And so I hope this will inspire all of us to obey God fully and to trust Him. I hope this message has been meaningful to you. I hope you and your family are all doing well. And if we can be of service to you in any kind of way, if we can help you in anything that you might be dealing with during this time when we are still partially separated from one another, I hope that you'll let us know. That's what your church family is here for, to be a blessing towards you. I hope everybody has a wonderful evening, and hope you have a blessed week as we begin this new week. And we'll be talking to you again soon.